Welcome. Here we are once more. It is Wednesday, and to remind the listener, we told everybody this past Monday, but we're going to take Friday off to celebrate our independence, celebrate America on the 4th of July. For those of you who are new to the channel, we broadcast live on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 3 p.m. Central Time. Today, Antonio is out, and so our very own Wesley Todd and myself are going to be interviewing a special guest, John Waters, who is the author of a new book, The Abolition of Reality, which is recently published by Western Front Books, located here in Texas. John, the author, is actually living in Dublin, Ireland. And so we're going to pipe him in and interview him on why he wrote this book and what the book's about. And we'll take questions from you, the audience, in our third and final segment. So if you want to go ahead in the chat, if you're watching live, type in your questions, and we'll get to those again in the third segment. So again, this is going to be an episode interviewing an author, special guest, John Waters, who just published with Western Front Books his new book called The Abolition of Reality. This episode is brought to you by our premier sponsors, Armored Republic and Reese Fund, as well as our Patreon members and our generous donors. If you'd like to join our Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries, and you can make a charitable donation today, tax-free, by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. Okay. Good afternoon. Here we are. And as promised, we have a special guest who's going to be joining us today. This is John Waters, the author of The Abolition of Reality. John, thanks for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. So I'm going to start with a two-part question and give you as much time as you want. I mean, you could take the whole first segment. You've got about 20 minutes to answer this question. We can ask follow-up ones, but I'm sure there's plenty right here to discuss. And so here's the question for pretty much any author. What is this book about, The Abolition of Reality, and what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it's about the last 5 years of Western civilization and indeed the world more generally, what's happened in the course of what the World Bank has been calling the COVID project, otherwise known as COVID to everybody else. But the World Bank call it the COVID project, which is a very interesting formulation, I think. And I think as we go on, people will begin to understand that this is actually probably a more accurate term than simply COVID. But I started first of all in the spring of 2020, watching what was happening in my country and in the world, and really being unable to believe that it was actually happening in the society that I'd grown up in, which was, a free society, pretty much, that I was able to move and do what I pleased in a certain sense, move around my country and speak to whoever I pleased to speak to. And suddenly they were telling me that I wasn't permitted to leave my house unless I had a reasonable excuse. And if I had and did, I would have to stay within 2 kilometers of my house. To me, that was unthinkable. And at that point, myself and a friend, another former journalist, decided that we would take a constitutional action against this. And we went to the court, and we got the runaround there for actually 2.5 years before they basically shut us down. But I then started in September of that year. Once I began to realize this was going to go on for a long time, it seemed, I decided that I would start to write about it, because I'd been kind of cancelled from as a journalist from the mainstream some years before, and I had been writing for First Things in the United States, and also for The Spectator, various publications like that, but I didn't have a fixed regular platform that I could use in this way. So I learned about Substack, and my stepdaughter set me up on Substack, and off I went. And so I really just wrote about various aspects of what was happening from the viewpoint of understanding that what was going on was extraordinarily varied, very sinister, very complex, and very, very deeply thought out. And I decided that I needed to find out. I had very limited knowledge of lots of the different things that were happening. For example, propaganda. I had a skeletal knowledge of propaganda, but I didn't really think that it was sufficient to understand what was happening. So I started to investigate these things and read about these things, and then to write out of that reading and reflection on what was happening. And I wrote like hundreds of thousands of words in the course of the next 4 years. And there about a year ago, Joseph Dingdinger approached me and said that he'd been reading my Substack and he would love to publish a book of my work in this area. And so that's how I then began to put together this collection, which is really directed at the things that were happening, that the skeletal story of what the meaning of this is, and the methodologies that were used, and the purpose of it, and where it, what kind of strange things are going on in the undertows of this whole experience, and really with the view to producing a book, literally a book, because I don't really trust the online thing to stay. Even though everybody says, "Oh no, if it's online, it's there forever." I don't believe that. I don't think it's true at all. They can take it away at any moment, whoever they are, and so I decided I wanted to write a book, and that I wanted it to be for the future. That in the event that, as seemed to be likely, that our history would be terminated and then started from scratch in an entirely new vein and from an entirely different perspective. I wanted a book that would actually be rooted in the factual history that I had learned and that I had watched in my life. And I was inspired to some extent by rereading 1984, George Orwell's novel, uh, about his totalitarian dystopia. It's set in that year, 1984, which I remember very well, that actual year, and I read the book before that year, and I decided it would be good to read the book afterwards, that I should read it again after 1984 had passed and see what effect that had on me. And so I, but when I was reading it, I came across this section where the hero of the book, if you like, the protagonist, Winston Smith, is starting a diary, and he's sitting in an alcove, which he believes, mistakenly as it turns out, is hidden from the telescreen on the wall. And so he's writing in this beautiful new notebook he's got, and he's saying to himself, "Well, who am I writing for?" And he decides, for the future, for the unborn. And I decided, well, that's what I will do. I will write a book for the unborn, and to produce a book for the unborn. Now, much of the material in the book is more or less the same as it was in the original Substack form. There are some chapters which are rewritten substantially, uh, and amounting to quite a proportion of the book. It's a very big book. There's something like a quarter of a million words. Uh, and that's really, really extremely economical. I had vastly more material if I wanted to include it, but there's a limit to what a book can hold physically as well as in other senses. Books fall apart if there's too much in them. So that's essentially why I wrote it, and I was moved to write it because um, I was just stunned that this was happening. I remember, as I said, 1984, the year 1984, and I remember there being a buzz around the whole place at that time about Orwell and his vision of this dystopia. And, it was kind of an exciting thing in a way. It was kind of like this story, this bizarre story of something that couldn't possibly happen, could it, in our countries, in our nations, in our civilization. And yet here we were now, right there. And everybody had been talking about, 1984 and sort of, imagining, well, isn't it wonderful that we're in the free West and these things can't happen here and so on. And here they were happening. And so that's fundamentally, and then to go into a system that I thought was constructed with justice and truth and beauty and all of these things in mind, that these were the uppermost values, and find that all of the values that I thought I'd taken for granted, really, they were now in the garbage can, as you would say, waiting for disposal. And that really staggered me, to be honest. And I decided, that I should uh, put a record out there that people in the future can pick up and at least begin to piece together, you know, maybe, well, first of all, what happened in the world? Uh, what does this book say about what the world was like before? And what is this book saying about what might be done to reverse this? And so I try to answer those questions in the course of the book. So
So,
that's
John,
basically.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. So it sounds like right there at the end, you said, what could be done to reverse that? And so it sounds like in your book, you don't just discuss the diagnosis and how did we get here and how severe this psyop and propaganda really was, but how to reverse it. It sounds like you discuss some of the solutions for the listener, or at least I should say for the viewer. I'm holding the book right now. I'll hold it up for the camera so that you can see it clearly. This is a copy of the book, and John was not lying when he said the book is quite thick. You could purchase it as a door stopper, or you could read it. We would highly suggest the latter. But this is not a small book. The words. There are many words, lots of words on each page. So I think you said 250,000 words,
Yeah.
which is substantial. But going back to my question real quick, so it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't just give the diagnoses and what happened with this COVID project, this propaganda, and what led up to it, but how we might, by the grace of God, be able to reverse it, some solutions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's threaded into it. I mean, there are various things. I mean, one of them, the strongest, I think, sections in that regard. There's a Belgian psychologist called Matias Desmat, who became very high profile during this whole episode, talking about totalitarianism and mass formation and mass entrancement, these concepts. And I interviewed him several times because I found him really interesting. And most of the interviews that I did with him anyway are included as text in an index at the back of the book. And he was very, very clear that the most important thing in the face of such circumstances is for people not to not to give up, not to give in, and not to give up. That you must continue and never disregard as being too little anything you can do by way of standing up to this tyranny, because this, at least he says, will mitigate the cruelty somewhat. It may not prevent, it may not stop, it may not thwart the project, but it will actually mitigate the cruelty, and that's very important. Another thing that I dealt with, which is quite related to that, in fact, uh, I don't think that Matthias wasn't aware of this particular person when I was talking to him at first, but he became aware of him then. That is Václav Havel, the former, the late now, president of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic between 1990 and I think 2004. And he wrote an extraordinary essay many years before called The Power of, I think about 1976, The Power of the Powerless. And it's about, what people in their ordinary lives can do. Because, there are only sort of certain set pieces that you can describe by way of removing a rogue regime. You can, by violent insurrection, by voting, or perhaps it's a long shot, and by velvet revolution, which is the way that Václav Havel eventually led his country out of communism. uh, whereby the people of Prague were brought onto the street, literally a million of them, and they stayed there for 12 days until the communist government ran away. But Havel tells this story in this essay about a greengrocer in Prague who has a sign in his window and among the vegetables, and the sign says, "Is that the height of the communist era?" Uh, it says, "Workers of the world unite." And Havel says that this greengrocer does not believe this sentiment, but he has this sign there in order for a quiet life, essentially. And Havel says that this is the problem, that if people, as it were, refuse to refuse, then they support, they actually
Mm,
endorse and they buttress the tyranny. And that the
mm.
important thing that is that even in the smallest ways, to simply refuse to cooperate, to refuse to do the things that you're being asked, the absurd things, or to say the absurd beliefs that you're told, that they're, men can become women, for example, just off the top of my head, that if you refuse to do these things, it is no little thing. It is no small thing to do that every day. And that might be in the context of the so-called pandemic, to refuse to wear a face covering, which you believe to be absurd, or whatever that might be. And that ultimately then, that is what really leads to the disintegration of tyranny, when you have a sufficient critical mass of people who are simply refusing to cooperate. At that
I
point, then,
completely agree, John. You're right. I told people as we were going through the pandemic, I said it's not that the medical science changed. What really happened is that the political science changed, and it changed precisely where, in our case, in our country, when the American people no longer had the will to comply. The moment that America said, "We're done with this," oh, turns out you don't have to wear a mask anymore. Turns out you can go outside. They immediately lessened all the different restraints and restrictions the moment that people said we're not having it. And so you're right. All these little things, we sometimes think that, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm just a number. I'm one of millions. But all these
yeah.
small things actually add up. Refusing to wear, a piece of cloth over your face, all these different things make a great deal of difference. So Wesley Todd actually has some questions that he's going to ask you. But before we get to some of his questions and give you a chance to respond, I just want to remind those who are watching us live right now, go ahead and put your questions in the chat and make it clear, distinguish it from just a comment question, and then go ahead and write whatever questions you have for John. We're going to do our best to get to as many questions as possible in our third segment. And then in our second segment, as I've already said, we'll have Wesley Todd ask some of his own questions to John. But for now, before we hop into the second segment, let's go to our first commercial break.
The danger of centralized power is often represented by the word king. As Americans, we hate the word king. Civilian ownership of body armor is about helping people to have increased power to resist tyrants and criminals. And so, Armored Republic is about helping you to preserve your God-given rights to the honor of the Lord Jesus Christ, because he is the King of Kings, and he governs kings and he will judge them. This is Armored Republic, and in a republic, there is no king but Christ. We are free craftsmen, and we are honored to be your armorsmith of choice.
Hello, brothers in Christ. Let me ask you something real. Are you truly protecting and providing for your wife and children, not just in this life, but the one to come? Here's a reality check. Only 45% of adults in America have life insurance, and of those, nearly 2/3 are underinsured. That's not good stewardship. And as Christian husbands and fathers, we're called to do better. But what if you could protect your family's future and wisely grow your wealth right now? That's where private family banking comes in. It's a proven strategy that allows you to leverage your existing cash flow, build tax-free legacy wealth, and give your family lasting security, all while aligning with your biblical call to provide and protect. This is what it looks like to turn post-mill talk into post-mill action. Tap the link in the show notes to book your free discovery call and take your next step toward financial discipleship and multi-generational impact. Looking for a God-honoring courtship for your young adult? Introducing covenantmatches.com, the exclusive, biblically grounded matchmaking platform for Trinitarian Christians who value purity, tradition, and parental guidance. No woke ideologies, no LGBTQ influence, just serious believers from approved states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, and soon vetted international members from nations like the Philippines, Mexico, and Poland. Parents and guardians, you're in control. Create profiles for your sons and daughters 18 years or older. Oversee the courtship process and let our AI-generated avatars maintain modesty for you. No worldly dating app photos on this site. We uphold the statement of faith. Only Trinitarian Christians need apply. This is for those seeking true biblical courtship, not modern dating chaos. Launching in 20 states with international expansion coming soon. Secure your family's future with covenantmatches.com, where faith, tradition, and parental wisdom lead the way. Visit covenantmatches.com today, because godly marriages start with godly foundations. Again, that's covenantmatches.com.
So welcome back. Once again, we have John Waters with us. John is the author of The Abolition of Reality. And John, I want to connect the things that you're saying to the title of your book. And you mentioned 1984, which it's funny, I actually remember reading it for the first time in 2020. But a real-life example of 1984 and something Orwell's modeling, this is also his earlier book, Animal Farm, is communist Russia. And I think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And you use that title, The Abolition of Reality, and it's a great title. But there's also really a truth to it, because much of what communist Russia did and said was, we want you to go ahead and disbelieve what you've seen. The party has given its orders. The party has rendered its verdict on this. There's only the current. This is in 1984 as well. You think of Stalin, when he would fall out of favor with someone, they would get removed from the picture. Like, no, of course, this is all the picture ever included. Just me and these three people, me and these two people. It's just me alone in this picture. That's all it's ever been. And so we've actually seen the historical precedent that the party, that the elite, they would come in and say, you need to disbelieve. This is from 1984. The party's requirement was to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears, and that was its final, most essential command. But it happened again. Oh, COVID can get you if you're standing up. Sit down in a restaurant and you're fine. Take a vaccine. Now, this will protect me, right? And I won't get sick. Oh no, you'll still get sick with it, and you'll still die. Could you connect the pieces with, they literally told you, reality is not what you think it is. It's not the evidence you have in front of you. It's what we decided to make it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then the title has multiple kind of resonances, in the sense that one of the things they did was, create a pseudo reality, which deceived people into believing that, the world was now utterly different, and the moral systems of the world were different. And, that we had to, individual freedoms were somehow forfeit to the crowd, to the mob, to the collective. But there's another dimension as well, and it's very much in relation to what you said there about the final chapter, which is one of the pieces in the book which is new. It didn't originally, it hasn't appeared before the book, and it's called Satanic Playground. And what it's about really is the weaponization of the play instinct in humans, which is possibly one of the most, fundamental instincts of humanity, and also actually of animals. Many categories of animal play and demonstrably play. And it seems to me, and I've gone through this in great detail, because when you actually look back at those satanic dancing nurses, you ask yourself, well, what was that about? This dark sort of dance of not just dancing, but burlesquing the very idea of illness, making fun of the idea of dead bodies and so on, coffins being danced around with, that kind of thing. And I went into this in some detail, but the idea of the play and the game, if you think about, when you were a child and at Christmas time, you would get a new game with maybe your siblings or your friends, and everybody then would eventually they would read through the small little booklet that was in the box, and you would read them and try to figure out what these rules were saying, and then everybody would sit around for a sort of a test game and work out the rules between them. And the rules in the book, in the booklet, didn't have to relate to the real world, as it were. They were internal to the game, and there was no point in arguing or pleading the facts of the real world in the game. And when you think about it, the thing about you're talking about the face covering, like, a game, for example, where you walk into a room and you're permitted to, you must have your face covered when you walk into the room, say a bar, and you must wear the face covering as you walk across the floor, but as soon as you see a chair and sit on it, you can take the face covering off. And then you can sit there for as long as you like and no face covering, and that's fine. You can breathe as heavily as you like, and that's fine. There's no danger then to anybody from this disease you might be suffering from. But if you stand up, again, you must put the face covering on. And if you walk to the bathroom or to the bar, you must wear the face covering. Now, if you go to the bar and you want to order some food, well, you can order a €9 in our case, possibly a $9 meal. I don't know about the American situation, but we in Europe had to order meals no less than €9, not €8.99. No, so you have a €9 meal, and in order to eat that, you can take off the face covering, and then you can eat, and you can then you must put it back, as long as you are standing up. But if you can go back to your seat and sit down, you can take it off again. Okay? Now, this is the game, right? And these are the rules. And nobody questions those rules. Why? Because they're the rules. It's not like they have to make sense in the real world. And that's one of the fiendish tricks they played on people. They sucked people into a logic that was completely absurd, completely surreal, and convinced them of the necessity for it by making the thing feel like a game. You understand? It's really quite fiendish when you think about it. And so I go into that idea very substantially. I'd written this originally back in 2021. It was one of the earliest things I wrote. But when I went through the article, the chapters, and I wasn't happy with that particular one. I didn't feel that I captured the idea adequately, so I didn't include it at first. But then when I got to coming to the end of putting the book together, I realized that it wasn't really, the ending was just, it was sort of falling off a cliff, and I wanted to do something more resonant, to leave people with some feeling of, the absurdity of this and so on. So I rewrote it completely, and it expanded enormously in that process. So I'm very happy with that chapter. It's a very long chapter, but I think it's probably, I don't know that anybody else has actually really gone into that idea. I have seen reference to the idea in general terms, but I don't think anybody else has gone into it in depth.
Interesting. I want to go to a shorter chapter from your book. I haven't read all of it, but there's a fascinating short chapter on the new aristocracy. I think it's from around 2022. And you call out, and this is huge, and this is the world that we're still living in right now. We're living downstream of a massive amount of wealth consolidation within the top tiers. And you point out that leftist commentators, even those that were willing enough to be honest and to be forthright and to just deal with reality as it was, that they anticipated that there was in many ways an accumulation of wealth. This is your Jeff Bezos. This is your Mark Zuckerberg. This is big tech companies. And COVID was a massive boon to them. When you were sitting at home shopping, your mom and pop store that you started and you ran for 30 years, you had to be closed. But Amazon was pumping out, literally orders, thousands of dollars on the second. And so we saw this massive accumulation of wealth. And it's interesting because I think you wrote this in 2022, and right at the end of 2022, a tool came out that has changed the world since, and that was ChatGPT. And in the years following that, we've seen the explosion of AI. And AI, I mean, just today, Microsoft announced the layoff of 9,000 jobs. This comes on the heels of cuts at AT&T, cuts at Verizon, cuts at Business Insider, all because they're able to do more, faster, more efficiently through AI. And it seems to be really continuing this trend. So I know that chapter's from a little bit earlier, but I think I see, and you could tell me if you agree, the same thing that COVID started with the elite and the collection and accumulation of wealth at the top. You talk about basically a 1% class of trillionaires and then nothing. That at the rest of it's just simply flat. You have a mountain and then there's no foothills, no smaller mountains. It's just level at the base. Could you expand on that?
Well, this was one of the most shocking aspects of the whole thing for me because, again, I had grown up in Ireland, which was, a country that was kind of having been somewhat backward in the past, was speeding up and it was developing all kinds of newfangled ideas and becoming a globalist economy and so on, and also a transnational economy. Really, it wasn't an Irish economy, but the whole value system that we were breathing in was to do with, certain values which were kind of somewhat leftish increasingly, but at the core of those ideas up to 2020 was the idea was an idea of suspicion of those who were grasping in terms of their relationship to their function in the economy or in life in general. I mean, the idea of acquisitiveness was kind of frowned upon in that culture, in the sense that people who were, that there was always a sense that you had to, as a businessman, honor the society which had enabled you to become wealthy and so on. And suddenly, such values seem to just disappear, to evaporate all overnight. And people who had been previously vocally left-wing suddenly seem to be, if you listen to them carefully, saying things or adopting positions that supported the most powerful and the richest forces on the planet in becoming even richer and more powerful. And this seemed to me to be extraordinary to me. Because I was somebody who started off as a kind of a soft leftist, 30, 40 years ago, and kind of gradually through life experience began to see that this was a very kind of shallow and limited worldview. And I changed in various ways. I don't know what I would call myself. I don't like terms actually like left and right that much, but they're sort of a useful shorthand to make points around these kind of questions. But I kind of, whereas I moved, let's say, to the right, I wasn't really, I didn't really oppose liberal ideas in the classical sense. I believed in liberty. I believed in freedom. I believe in the right to speak and to express opinions that were controversial or whatever. So suddenly it seemed that these values were. I mean, people were saying that liberty is a far right obsession. Like people were actually said things like this. Suddenly in one week in May of 2020, out of nowhere. And I kind of thought, how did everybody get some very long memo that I missed?
Right.
That everybody seemed to be really adapted to what was happening in a way that I couldn't understand. Now, I don't even understand. I don't think that the explanation that they were offering, which was that there is a deadly pandemic, which I knew there wasn't anyway. But even if there was, I always have said, I insist, they had no right to do what they did. These people, these politicians in each individual country had no authority to do the things they did or impose the restrictions they did. And yet only a tiny minority of people thought that and said that at the time. Now, more people are beginning to say it now and maybe seeking to rewrite their own history a little bit. But we know, I remember, at that time, almost nobody was speaking out. Nobody was, and if you did, you were attacked. And I was attacked all the time. I mean, for 2.5
Right.
years, I couldn't walk down the street without being attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you mentioned too briefly, I think one of the big transitions, and obviously Ireland is much smaller than the United States, but even the economy now has been much more transitioned to very Western focus as far as its imports and exports. Obviously, immigration, as far as I can trust headlines, not being there. What's undergone too is not just a change in, well, for a couple of years we had policies on social distancing and policies on restaurants, but the entire economic fabric of a people that for hundreds of years have occupied this place has pretty much overnight been changed, correct? Would that be an accurate way to describe it?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, everything about our country, it's clear that there has been a determined attempt to reinvent the entire West and to impose on it all kinds of things that really are incredible, really, not almost, but are incredible. I mean, this idea of the mass migration, it isn't even mass migration, it's mass plantation.
Mm,
It's the coercive replacement, in effect, of our number. And then certainly in Ireland, that's the case. I mean, Ireland is now terminally ill, and
mm,
I mean that literally. You know, we used to say 7 or 8 years ago when we first began to sort of really talk about this quite openly, myself and some friends, we said that, by the way things were going then, Ireland would be, the Irish people would be a minority in their own country by 2050. Well, I'm very sad to say that we were completely wrong about that, because now the chances are that that will happen before 2035, if not by 2030. The
mm,
numbers are increasing of outsiders becoming in is increasing and is swelling at such a rate that and nobody can trust the statistics they're being given, because to look at any streetscape you wouldn't even think, they tell us it's 25% of now non-national. Well, I'm sorry, if you look at any urban
mm.
streetscape, you're thinking it's something like 70%.
Yeah. What blows my mind, and it makes me angry, and others have pointed this out too, the people were never asked. Well, one of at least, if you could try to sum up some of the benefits, or at least the good things we have going for us since World War II, is that typically in the West, most nations would be democratic. That would refer to, theoretically, the people themselves and their rule, their will, is what's being exercised. That when we in the United States, we elect representatives and they represent our will. But whether it be here in the United States, whether it be the UK, or whether it be Ireland, we were never asked. And as we ask for it to stop, as anyone that basically runs on an anti-immigration party typically enjoys decent success, then they get in office, they refuse to carry it out. Or if we're here in the United States, even our own representatives, our own senators refusing to vote to strip Medicaid, that is health benefits, from those who are here illegally. We were never asked. We're telling them we don't want it to continue. And they say, it sounds like you want more, which is, I mean, can you think of something more totalitarian and coercive? We will take, in the case of Ireland, this historic Christian English, or not English, but a European nation, and we will dispossess it and we will make it a land of foreigners. We don't want that. It's having all these downstream effects. We don't care.
That's right. It's the contempt of, this is the most, I suppose, scarifying aspect of all of this, that the demeanor and the visage of the political class has changed utterly from what it was 6 or 7 years ago.
Mm,
That they now look at their own people, their indigenous peoples, in all countries I see, pretty much. Maybe not in the United States, certainly not President Trump. It doesn't do that. But most European countries, certainly, France, Germany, Britain, Ireland. The leaders of the so-called leaders of the political establishment, they look upon those who vote for them as, animals almost. They have this
yeah.
total contempt for them, total disregard for their opinions. They tell them ridiculous lies. Like they tell them that, for example, that they have an international obligation to take in outsiders. Well, I say, nobody, and then there's no discussion. Those of us who have something to ask or question, to any question to pose to these people, are never permitted near them. Like, because the obvious question is, well, if you have an international obligation, how come Ireland has taken in pro rata double what its nearest competitor, as it were, in this context, has brought in the last 25 years? In other words, we have twice as many as the second country in that league, which is Spain. And yet we're told that this is an international obligation. Well, how come this international obligation is not shared by other countries in Europe? And they don't have to answer such questions because nobody in the public square asks them, is permitted to ask them. And so the public are there thinking, well, I don't like this, but I better keep my mouth shut because I'm going to sound like a racist. Right. And that's the way it's done. But you see, the other point is really that many people just don't get that this is terminal. They can't imagine such a thing. You don't need to be much of a mathematician to see when you look at the inflows, when you look at the proportions. Like, I mean, I'll just give you off the top of my head, a figure I saw recently by the Central Statistics Office, which said that the numbers of people the increase in the Irish population between 2019 and last year breaks down as follows. 94% is alien.
Ugh.
And 6% is indigenous. Oof. The increase. Now, how long do you think a country like ours can survive with those kind of metrics?
Wow. And even if you took relatively compatible people, say you took England to Germany, so 94%, like you said, over the last 5 years of Germany's growth, say it was just from England, that alone would cause massive problems. But from the third world of integration, of language, of jobs, and to root it in the title of your book, when asked, this is going terribly. Look at what's happening to our children, especially in England. And the politicians literally say, why would you believe your lying eyes over the soothing, kind, anti-racist words and rhetoric that I'm telling you?
Well, and then there's the Islamic question, because I mean, this is something that is not really discussed either, because look at Lebanon, which back 80 years ago was a completely white population. Now and when it began to expand and migrants started to come in, particularly Muslims, the indigenous population said, "Oh, well, we're a tolerant people. We're going to integrate with our newcomers, and we're going to share power, and we'll have a white president, but we're going to have a Muslim prime minister." Yes, certainly. And that was all very well until the other side became the majority, and then it all changed. And that's what happens. That's what happens. The idea, people just reflute. You see, one of the things they do is they demonize certain concepts so that you by using certain words, you set off all kinds of alarms. Like if you say replacement, which I do, or if you say invasion, which I do, or if you say plantation, which I do. And I take the view that, if you want to know what are the most important words to use, then look at the words they're telling you can't use, because they're the ones they want to suppress so that people don't get to hear them. But this is really, I say to people, this is how it is, that the way things are going, your children will not have a homeland in which to lay their heads and call their own.
And this didn't happen.
The people coming here from other countries, whatever the conditions in those countries, they have homelands to return to.
Right.
We won't have any place to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's so tragic about all of it. Those of European descent in Western countries, they don't have another home to go to. You're exactly right. We're going to go to our last commercial break now of the day. And when we come back, we're going to try to deal with some of the questions in the chat. So some of you guys who are in the chat, we see you, Foxhound, Javier, Deacon, St. John. We appreciate you guys for being regulars and tuning in. If you have a question for us or for John Waters, go ahead and get those ready now. We're going to go to our final commercial break, and then we'll come back and deal with the questions. In the future, it may be hard to persuade people that what happened starting in the spring of 2020 really did happen. A fake pandemic was the signal that one morning began the foreclosure on everything that had, until the evening before, been central to the idea of democratic constitutional republics. The most shocking thing was not so much that this started to happen, but that almost no one seemed to object to it happening. Almost no one sought to defend the rights and liberties being overturned. Leftists clamored for more and more tyranny, while most conservatives fell silent. In this book, The Abolition of Reality, Irish dissident leader John Waters describes not merely what happened, but the meaning of what happened, in what may well be judged by history as the most heinous crime of all time. This book, as Winston in 1984 said, is for the future for the unborn. Get it from Western Front Books at the link below. That's www.westernfrontbooks.com. Again, that's www.westernfrontbooks.com. Heaven's Harvest takes pride in providing you with the best freeze-dried emergency survival food kits on the market. Their kits stand out because they prioritize serving sizes and calories that will sustain you for the long haul. No gimmicks, no fillers, just a diverse array of nutritious options that will pleasantly surprise you. But they're more than just emergency food. They're advocates for sustainable preparedness. Their heirloom seed kits include heirloom, non-GMO, non-hybrid, open-pollinated seeds, ensuring that your garden produces the same quality and variety year after year. Packaged in high-grade mylar foil, their seeds have a 10-year shelf life. So get 10% off your Heaven's Harvest order by using our special discount code RRM at checkout or by clicking the link in the description below. Made in the USA and free shipping on orders above $99 for the US only. Sending your son to a competitive school often places a significant additional burden on the family. While these schools promised high academic rigor, character development, and preparation for top-tier universities, much of the workload ultimately falls on the parents. The combination of early dismissals, as early as 2:30 p.m., heavy homework demands, and sports commitments can create an overwhelming and stressful experience for both students and their families. At St. John's, our philosophy is different. We prioritize structure, balance, and efficiency to ensure students thrive academically, physically, and spiritually. Here's how we do it. Our instructors are the cornerstone of our commitment to excellence, bringing a unique blend of expertise, discipline, and leadership to the classroom. Earning $200,000 annually, our educators are among the most accomplished in their fields. 9-hour school days. Classes run from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., maximizing learning during school hours. Our confession brings clarity, fosters unity, and glorifies Christ as we seek to instruct, develop, and mentor young men in loving God and neighbor rightly, to the glory of God. Ordo amoris et soli Deo gloria. And finally, our curriculum, Integra, is a challenging blend of STEM with classical Christian humanities. Campuses opening in the summer of 2026 in Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. Visit stjohns.academy to learn more and sign up today. Again, that's stjohns.academy to learn more today. Okay, we're back. John, we have a few questions queued up, but before I begin to ask them, I have one of my own. I'm always interested in what people think in terms of future predictions, and I understand that none of us have a crystal ball. We're not omniscient. God alone is. But I am curious to hear your perspective of, we know the last 5 years. What do you foresee for the next 5 years?
Well, I believe that what is augured in these events of the past 5 years is now about to culminate in the meltdown of the global economies, of currencies. I call it the supernova of the currencies: the dollar, the euro, and the pound sterling. All those Western currencies are about to collapse because of the weight of debt. and they're going to be replaced by central bank digital currency. This is the proposal, which will be driven by surveillance and social credit systems akin to the Chinese model that's been experimented with over there in recent years. And the idea is to really create a digital prison whereby every person will be dependent on the state for their income, their universal basic income, which will be a kind of a social welfare. But it will be, unlike other forms of money, it will be programmable. In other words, if you behave in ways that the state disapproves of, your money can be curtailed or cut off. And this will make, I think, this is calculated to make a population of meek, subversive serfs. Now, I don't think that that is going to take. I don't think it's going to work, but I do think it's going to do massive damage in the attempt to our civilization and to its values and to its fabric. So, I mean, I think that's the good news, maybe in a certain sense, because will perhaps be able to work through that and reclaim something of our human reality. And you mentioned earlier that idea about AI and so on. That thing has been in plan. There's a couple of chapters in my book which are about this, and about the fact that project, which should have been a democratic discussion, what the future of the human race in relation to the machine, the future of human work in relation to the machine. These things were never discussed at a public level by my profession, of journalists, or indeed by much by artists until relatively recently in some novels that we have been seeing. But that was a deliberately orchestrated situation, in my view, that prosperity was generated in the West in order to distract people away from this vital moment in the evolution of the human race in reality. And now we're at the cusp of this, the culmination of all of this, and we are not prepared, and we're not aware, and we're not in any way conscious of the dangers that are now facing us.
Yeah, agreed. We have a couple comments here, and then I'll read a couple questions. But two of these are super chats that we greatly appreciate. One is from Appeal to Heaven 7. He gave us $5. Thank you, Appeal to Heaven 7. We appreciate that. He said, and yet, meanwhile, our leaders in the United States are worried about Gondor's budget being balanced, while orcs are at the gates. Policy only goes so far. This is a great conversation. Yeah, we hear you. And man, I'll be honest, that's a tough issue. I find myself on both sides. I appreciate Thomas Massey greatly, and the way that he stood up to our greatest ally, Israel, and not taking the AIPAC money and being, running on, I mean, he's defending, I should say, many of the policies that Trump actually ran on, solvency and these kinds of things. And that's kind of what John is getting at when it comes to the deflation and complete destruction of Western currency and debt. At the same time, I also understand the other position, and I find myself being torn between the two, because I do agree that balancing the budget is of utmost importance, but in our case, 50 million need to go back, and you can balance the budget all day long, but if you don't actually stop the bleeding, the fact that we are paying exorbitant amounts for illegal aliens and even people who have come legally according to the letter of the law, but have broken the spirit of the law, our leaders betraying their native people by ushering in a full-scale invasion in our nation to destroy the fabric of heritage America. If you can't send these people back and you can't stop them from coming, then balancing the budget ultimately does nothing. And so $36 trillion is insane. And yet I know that it's a bold remark that I'm about to make, but I'll make it nonetheless. I would be happy to go ahead and boost that up to 40 trillion if the 40 trillion got us whatever provisions Trump needs to get 50 million people out of our country. And then we can solve the budget. But to be honest, sometimes I find myself blackpilling a little bit. And today is one of those times. I've got a feeling that our leaders will find a way to get us to 40 trillion. but also not deport the 50
You're
million.
getting the 40 trillion.
You're getting
but not the 40
you're
million.
getting the 40 trillion in debt. You are not getting the 50 million in deportation. So great comment, though. Appeal to Heaven 7. I see where you're coming from, and I think it's a good point. This is a $200 super chat from Ben Huffstedler. Ben, thank you so much. We had the pleasure of meeting you at the New Christendom Conference. Great guy. We appreciate your generosity to this ministry. It means the world. He said, stay bold, guys. Keep calling Christian princes to the front lines. Amen. Okay, Nathan, let's scroll to the top. There's a question here from Deacon St. John, and this is for you, John Waters. He asks, this kind of multi-part question, okay? So he says, how do we undo the degradation that's been done over the last 5 years? Do we repair, or do we become countercultural? Do we tear down, actually, and then rebuild something new? Or do we let the dead bury their dead? What are some strategies?
Well, there's different answers to that depending on who you think the we is in any particular instance. I mean, I think there are different answers for the collective, and there are different than for the individual. I mean, one would be tempted to urge people to pull back and try to find a special channel and that you can stay in and look after your family and, become self-sufficient and all of that, which a lot of people are doing. And I think that's an important thing. I think certainly in the future, if we come out of this, we will need to really start looking quizzically at the scale of the governments that we've created and the monsters of bureaucracy that have weighed down our society. So all of that is going to be important. So in a certain sense, a certain level of privatization of one's public role or function is going to become imperative. But I think for the societies, it's extremely difficult to because of this singular issue, which is the corruption of the mainstream media. And the problem with the mainstream media is not just that it is corrupt, it is that it's pretending to be honest. It is acting out as if what it is doing is the telling of the truth as it always was. It isn't. It's the opposite. So in that situation, you're fooling people in a very profound way. I mean, it's like literally that people are being left completely exposed to danger. They're being left in harm's way because it's, as I've said before, it's like a walled town, and then the elders are there and looking after their people and their children and so on. It's coming dusk, and they look out at the town, and the walls around it are all high walls, and they're turrets, they're security points where the armed guards are up in their turrets, and the elders look up and they say, "Oh, it's okay, everything is fine. The guards are at their posts. We can sleep easy. Our children can sleep safely." But then during the night, the barbarians rampage through the gates. They break down the gates and they slaughter the people and so on. And that's kind of what's happened, But you see, it turns out then that the guards in the posts weren't there. They were straw men who were rigged up for the night, and the guards all went to the public house, to the bars, and got drunk. And this is what's happened with our societies, fundamentally, that the guardians of our safety, the journalists, the journalistic profession, which is a sacred profession, a vocation to which I belonged for many years, has surrendered its obligations. It's abrogated and abdicated. And I think this has been the most awful thing that's happened in the whole thing, because none of the rest of it would have been possible had this not happened. And so we have to restore that as a priority. We have to start looking in all our societies at ways in which we can build a real alternative media, not an alt media such as we now have, because that's going off in all kinds of directions which are not particularly useful either. We need to create a model of media that is what the old fourth estate used to be. A watchdog on democracy, a watchdog on the constitutions of our countries, and so on. And that's, I think, the first imperative that we need to address.
Yeah. Here's another question from Ash Brews Podcast. She said, in your Substack, John, you express regret at being an authority, she quotes, an authority on the destruction of my country, end quote. How do you balance the weight of documenting social decline with hope for renewal or change?
Well, I don't know that you can necessarily posit such an equation as being definitive or being an imperative, because you can only posit the hope that is under different categories. Obviously, you can posit to the human being the hope that you believe in as a Christian, of the resurrection and so on. But for society, it's not so clear. Uh, what kind of hope do you offer other than platitudes in circumstances like these, in the context of the social circumstances and the political circumstances that we've been dealing with? That's a different question in a certain sense. It's the same question in another sense, but for this for the purposes of addressing these issues, uh, we have to work in practical ways to reconstruct our damaged culture, because it is a culture which has been damaged. Now we realize incrementally, osmotically, for decades. They've been working on it to undermine quantities like patriotism and loyalty and affection and respect for culture, for vertical culture, for the line of culture going back to antiquity, and that has been replaced by a horizontal culture which is very much to do with pop culture and movies and so on and so on, and there's many aspects of this, but fundamentally we can't address any of this without intelligent conversation in our societies. Once again, we once had this quality in our societies, I believe, to a reasonably high degree, not perfect by any means, but we did have, and I remember from my childhood, like watching TV or listening to the radio, there was intelligence that there isn't now. I don't listen to the radio, I don't watch TV, but sometimes I go into a shop and there's a radio or something on in this public address, and I have to listen to this gibberish for like 3 minutes before I run out of the shop, because it's impossible to bear this. So, yes, I think that, the Christian message is obviously remains, and we can survive many, many hardships through that, and many people in history, and in Irish history first certainly, have done so. But at the same time, to offer our people who are now struggling, Irish people young people cannot afford to buy homes or build homes in their own country. They can't even afford to live in their own country. They're being dispatched to Australia and Canada, and they're being replaced by cheap labour, by people who have no loyalty to the land of Ireland. They don't even know what it is. They know nothing of its history, and they don't care. And the politicians who put them there don't care either, because they are carrying out instructions from overlords. So, in different veins, you could talk about the question of hope in different ways. But at the moment, I have to say that in the political immediacy of the situation, there is minimal hope of a change without a radical alteration in the circumstances. And that needs to start with public conversation.
Yeah, agreed. Nathan, go back over to the comments. There was one from Javier. Yeah, right there. No, actually a little bit higher. There it is. I just thought this was insightful. Javier Oliva, he says, what is not reported is as important as what is reported or misreported. I'll say that again. What is not reported is as important, and arguably even more important, than what is reported or is misreported. And so it's not just that journalists, it's a great point, Javier, it's not just that journalists are twisting the truth and lying and corruption in terms of saying things that are false, but there are many true things and true stories that they, you can tell, go to great lengths to avoid entirely. And John, would you agree with that?
Oh, I 100% agree with it, because, a lie can take many forms. A lie can be a lie of omission. It
That's
can
right.
be a lie of innuendo. A lie is not a straightforward, technical matter that can be where did the person, state make an issue a precise statement of untruth. It can be, a grunt could be a lie. If you ask me for a loan of money and I my jacket pocket is full of cash, but I pull out the two trouser pockets and pretend that and show you that they're empty, and shrug. That looks like I'm telling you, oh, sorry, I don't have any money, but in fact I have lots of money, but I haven't said so. I haven't denied the fact that I have money, but so journalism cannot escape these things, like any more than anybody else can, But what they've done with journalism is much more sophisticated, even than that. It's that they've managed to actually distort reality in ways that were inconceivable before, by the way that they, yes, omit things, or also the way they include things, but with a low priority. In other words, because one of the things I've realized in the course of all this is that I didn't really understand how the public apprehended information, how they absorb information coming through media. You would think that, it's just a matter of, well, I read it in the paper or I heard it on the news. But in actual fact, repetition is critical. Reiteration, emphasis. Those things are in giving perspective to stories and to importance and to detail and subtlety. And if you reduce that, you can actually leave people with the impression that something that did happen and was significant was less significant than it was, or that it didn't really matter at all. I mean, and we've had that numerous times. I'll give you a minor example. In Ireland back in 2020, we had a figure for deaths of COVID from COVID to that point, completely false figure, of course, 1,760 it was. And then a health investigation committee looked into this and they found that it was actually too high. And they said the correct figure was, I think, something like 1,042. And that figure was published, in a certain degree in different newspapers and on the radio and TV, in way down the bulletin maybe or whatever. It was a sensational thing in a certain sense, but it wasn't treated sensationally. But then 2 days later, the same media went back to using the 1,760 figure and building from there up again, as if the thing had never happened at all. And nobody noticed. If you said it to anybody, say, oh yeah, I think I did hear something, I can't remember, but but no, I think the figure is now, I saw the figure today and it's very clear. So there are all these tricks which we didn't even know were possible. And this is lying, you see. Ultimately, this is all lying. It's not like that it's just tricks. It's not just that they're kind of massaging the facts. Massaging the facts is lying. Being economical with the truth is lying. All of these things. And journalists have forgotten these things. They think that, that they can, get away on a technicality when you come to telling the truth or not. Well, you can't.
Yeah, well said. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've appreciated it greatly. Again, the title of the book is The Abolition of Reality. The Abolition of Reality, written by John Waters, published by Western Front Books. John, can you tell people quickly where they can purchase the book and then also how they can follow you online?
Well, you can get the book from the publisher, from Western Front Books. Their website will sell it. If you're in the United States, it should be relatively straightforward. The delivery won't be very high. If you're outside the United States, probably Amazon is the best. I don't necessarily, I'm not a fan of Amazon, but it needs must. And I'm in the situation where, being a dissident, my books are essentially banned in Ireland, in that they don't get into the bookshops, they don't get distributed, and they don't get promotion in the mainstream media, not surprisingly, in view of the things I've been saying. But the Amazon, yes, Amazon.co.uk for people in Europe, or in Ireland, Amazon.ie. The book is reselling at a very, very reasonable rate, and they're offering free delivery at the moment. So that's a pretty good deal, I think, from them.
Great.
As for me, I'm on Substack, johnwaters.substack.com, or John Waters Unchained might get it for you on a good day. And I'm supposedly on Twitter, but I've more or less given that up for a dead loss, because they're shadow banning me there too, and it's a waste of effort, because you just don't get anything out there, But
Yeah.
it's on Substack really, and that's about it really, and my books. That's my thing.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on the show, and I hope that the listeners have benefited from this conversation, and that you'll patron John and his book. Again, that's Western Front Books if you're in the U.S., and then Amazon if you're outside of the U.S. And the best way to follow John and his writing, sounds like, is Substack. John, thanks again for coming on the show, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. I'm very much obliged to you all.
All right. Well, God bless you. God bless all the listeners. Remember, we're taking Friday off for the 4th of July to celebrate America's independence. And Lord willing, we will see everyone again this coming Monday, which I believe is July 7th at 3 p.m. Central Time.